Go.
Our case study was the events of 9/11. On September 11, 2001, the Twin Towers were hit in New York City by two terrorist planes, destroying the famous buildings and all of our lives forever. 3,000 Americans were killed. Anger and hurt over this tragedy still affect us today, as the war on terrorism is still a very relevant part of our lives. So our research question was, is forgiveness for an event like this even possible?
Of course, one of the biggest known terrorist attack is 9/11. It was at 8:45 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. New Yorkers were doing their normal daily routine, but that changes when the North Tower of the World Trade Center was hit by a plane. Many thought it was a freak accident, but that changes when another plane crashed into the South Tower. That was when people knew that America was under attack. There was nothing that people can do but watch in terror. And that wasn't enough, and because another plane crashed into the Pentagon also at 9:45 a.m., killing 125 military personnel and civilians along with 64 passengers. And it still didn't end there because a fourth plane was also hijacked. But passengers knew about it, and 3 of them decided to fight back. Reportedly, they fought back and causes the plane to crash into a rural field in western Pennsylvania, killing all 45 people on board. Okay. The aftermath, over 3,000 people were killed, but years later more died due to the toxic smoke that was breathed in while helping cleaning up damages. So the question we all had was, who is to blame? The culprit was a man named Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda. And when did it start? According to Akon Stefan, bin Laden's hatred toward America began during the Afghan-Soviet War in the late 1980s. The hatred intensified as American troops were based on the soil of Saudi Arabia, beginning of the 1991 Persian Gulf War. Bin Laden issued 2 documents declaring war on the United States, one in 1996 and another in 1998. But none of Al-Qaeda's early acts of terrorism took place on American soil. The CIA knew that it was only a matter of time that an act of terrorism would take place on American soil, but the agency couldn't pinpoint an actual date or act. Soon after 9/11, President Bush sought congressional authority to proceed with military action against Afghanistan. According to Atkins, the administration believed that the Taliban regime in Afghanistan provided a safe place for those responsible for 9/11. Encouraged by the president, Congress passed the Authorization for Use of Military Action Act within weeks of the 9/11 attacks. So why was the attack in Afghanistan and not Saudi Arabia? The hijackers were Saudi Arabian after all. Why not attack Saudi Arabia? One theory was that it's because we are allies with Saudi Arabia and we depend on them for oil. However, in the end, in the aftermath of 9/11, over 3,000 people died, and the president and the government experienced a loss of trust from the people.
I looked at the psychological aspects of 9/11, and it was known that psychological distress skyrocketed, as well as the emotions of those victimized by the attack themselves and those who had watched the event on TV and through the radio. And although research shows that forgiveness is an important positive response to negative interpersonal events, associations between psychological distress and forgiveness of mass violence have received less attention. A study done by Agronick and colleagues focused on the emotions and mentality of those victimized, on the distress of youth 9/11 victims. The youth were exposed to personal victimization, such as knowing someone who died in the events, and they were found to be at greater risk of PTSD, symptoms, anger, and hopelessness in the months that were coming after the event. According to a study done by Will and Brascombe, they assessed Americans' responses to the war in Iraq, and it was found that in-group threat, which is threat to America, can encourage in-group forgiveness for current harm doing. In-group itself is kind of like the fishbowl. It's all a same person's shared an identity, and in America, that's all of us share the same American identity because we're in the same country. And It was also found that American participants who were threatened with the possibility of another terrorist attack were more forgiving of the harm that their group had committed against the Iraqi people, to the extent that they became concerned for the future of the in-group. For the religious aspects of 9/11, we all know that forgiveness is a virtue in many religions. It is taught to help remove unhealthy emotions, to heal, and to remedy anger. According to the research done by McIntosh and his colleagues, religious individuals often believe that they should forgive. Personal religiousness is positively associated with reported tendency to forgive, and in addition, those who are more religious think that more and in reason in more sophisticated ways about forgiveness. Social indicators of religious involvement, such as frequency of religious service attendance, are inevitably associated with forgiving. In an article that I read in Christianity Today, there was a big bunch of people that were in the Christian community that gave their personal accounts of what they thought about after the attacks. And according to Wes Stanford, who is the president of Compassion International, he mentioned that he believed that from the ashes of 9/11 arose both horror and hope. He states that we Americans, united in the ashes of 9/11, are more united in our grief, became better versions of ourselves, and our giving was more generous, our volunteering more enthusiastic, and our worship more ardent. We unabashedly flew our flags and sang "God Bless America." A lot of religious people came together in unity during that time, and they actually they weren't thinking of the negatives, they thought of the positives. And another person named William Paul Young stated that, "How have I changed during this short span of time? I have become an incurable optimist. The arrival of tragedy is no longer the arrival of impossibility, no longer an impasse, but rather the arrival of God's presence amid difficult circumstances." To bring it all together, in the study Forgiving the September 11th Terrorists, Associations with Coping, Psychological Distress, and Religiosity, it was hypothesized that there would be more differences in responses to stress, psychological distress, and religiosity. They hypothesized, in relation to the degree in which participants had forgiven the 9/11 attackers. It was found that some people are able to forgive even shortly after the event occurs. And it was also found that those who are ambivalent about forgiveness reported more psychological distress. And lastly, it was found that even though religion may encourage individuals to value forgiveness, it does not necessarily mean that they will forgive. As a whole, 9/11 affected America and disrupted the flow of our culture. Because of the severity of this world event, it inevitably called for a response. What better response was there than the American flag? Jelaine Eberhard writes about her experience post-9/11 in her journal, Flags and Forgiveness, by stating, "Although New York alone has seen itself, its skyline, its communities, its families, its companies, physically altered, flags have become symbolic of the need to respond to what has happened, and they have spread far and wide beyond the boundaries of this city and nation." Right there, it is apparent that the flag that was already a symbol for our country gained yet another reason for Americans as a whole to view it as a safe haven, a mark of security. Looking to the flag was one way to show that we as Americans were looking to our country to guide us and to protect us. No one person can answer the many, many questions that surfaced, so it was our job to answer the first and foremost question, who are we? Identity as a whole was one aspect that could be looked at from two perspectives, individual and collective. From an individual standpoint, one could reflect on his or her thoughts and perceive the flag, recent events, and others how he or she wanted, and only take his or her ideas and thoughts into consideration. As individuals, it is our right to think how we want and to decide who we want to be by our side, if anyone. Eberhard also states that it was a personal choice to display the flag, and to figure out what the red, white, and blue conveyed in each and every person's life. On the other side of things, the flag acting as the go-to brought Americans together, which is the more collective side. Collectively, America could mourn, talk to one another, and share in mutually felt emotions and reactions. Collectively, citizens all around could be influences to each other, both good and bad. Instead of looking to each other as strangers, it was a good time to befriend and to work through a disastrous time. How we respond reflects who we are.
Yes, Everhard was right once again. Who we are displays or plays a huge part in any situation. Who we are and what we do creates what is known as the aftermath of the situation. Instead of our identity being one or the other, I think it's safe to say that the identity of America was both individual and collective. America dealt with it how we had to, personally and as a whole. In the field of the arts, writers, directors, artists, and producers were also influenced to the point that their works displayed their thoughts, emotions, and reactions. Numerous amounts of literary pieces sparked from the events of 9/11. Even though the pieces were ultimately created as a source of entertainment and to grab attention, I believe the purposes were much bigger than that. The songs Freedom and Undivided pay as a tribute to America and the ones who were lost. The movies Fahrenheit 9/11 and United 93 not only reenact, but also remember the innocence of all that were affected. Through these movies and songs, Americans responded in a positive way. The reactions and responses were full of support, tribute, remembrance, and empathy for one another all over again. Every story has two sides. In this case, it's America and the radical Muslim group that perpetrated 9/11. Not only did that group change the lives of many in our society, they changed the way Americans view Muslims as a whole. This yet again is another response, but instead of bringing out the support, this response evokes hate, discrimination, and distrust in their society. Such feelings have also caused hate crimes towards many in their society. We as Americans have tagged on a negative connotation to their whole people group. A select group of people that have the same features and same language ruined our view of them as a whole. One story comes to mind that I heard a few years back. A friend of a journalist was walking through the streets of New York City when a man attacked her. The friend was a hijab-wearing citizen of the U.S., and because she was Muslim, a man felt the need to scream and yell and make it a point to say that he wanted to behead her. She was not hurt, and the American attacker was arrested. Because of her race and religion, she was judged and almost hurt by a man who viewed her as an enemy. It is unknown when Americans as a whole will stop viewing their whole group as an enemy or terrorist, but it is known that this response will never trigger a collective and mutual forgiveness for one another. Yes, 9/11 was out of spite and hate for Americans, but the retaliation and revenge acts are no better. Muslims and Middle Eastern Americans are the victims when it comes to hate crimes, but if forgiveness was within arm's reach, there could be a strive toward restoration instead of a desire to seek revenge. It is very possible that if forgiveness started at the individual level, it could impact the collective whole to a point of publicly declaring a new beginning and a release of hate and anger. A back and forth revenge could be replaced. It's unrealistic that everyone in a group would be on board, but a collective group could make the difference. If not now, then eventually.
Okay, all of them were talking about America as a whole in their response. I look at the people who are directly affected and the first responders. So according to the 9/11 Encyclopedia, this is the largest concentrated emergency service response in American history. While they can't put a number to how many dispatchers were at the actual scene because there's so many off-duty officers coming in from all around New York because they felt obligated. More than 1,600 people lost their spouses or partners, and over 3,000 children lost their parents, and the New York Police Department lost 23 officers, while the fire department lost 343. I looked at two studies. One was conducted by Nati Ronell, who is the Department of Criminology, and also UD Level conducted this, and he's a head of the department at Multidisciplinary Studies and the Humanity, and they're both at Ariel University. The most powerful reactions they found were pain and anger. They talked to 13 parents who had laid their children to rest due to terror acts, and forgiveness only emerged as a response to direct questioning, so the parents did not bring it up on their own, and it proved to be a weak category expressed in a low voice that spontaneously moved back to anger. They had a huge question on who and what they could be mad at, because it was a big terror group. They couldn't personally take out their anger on one person, so they were just questioning why it had happened to them. These are results of their study. As you can see, all of them found no need or no willingness to forgive. And even with how many years it's passed, some at 20, their anger is still strong. And since these attacks, most of them became more active in politics and stuff. My second study was Tobiah G. Friedman. He's a military and family life consultant at Managed Health Network in Pennsylvania. And he went after the first responders. He talked to the firefighters, police officers, photographers, chaplains, and journalists. And these are just a few quotes from the study. One firefighter said, "It looked like a movie set, it was surreal, and he could never get the picture out of his head." And then a police officer who got called in said, "You have to deal with the tough ones later. If I focus on this now, I will turn and run," which is based on he was walking in and he saw all this horrific sight, and he couldn't just focus on anything because if he did, that would just completely tear him apart. And then the last one was another firefighter. "I was numb much of the time during the long days and weeks afterward, often moving through meetings and funerals like a robot. I kept reminding myself that I had a job to do and didn't have time to indulge myself or my feelings, and there was much work to be done." So this whole terrorist attack was huge on America, but it was that much bigger on everyone who was directly affected. As you can see, this firefighter's life was changed for the worse.
So in conclusion, 9/11 was a horrific event that brought our nation to its knees. The events that happened that day are blurred to most of us since we were so young, but taking a look at the accounts from many different aspects can help to clarify the history, culture, and religion, psychology, and personal stories and how they tie into forgiveness for this event. So, as we've heard, many people have not forgiven for the attack of 9/11, and some have. But the only thing that matters is that we still stand together as a nation, regarding our differences, and continue to be a strong, caring, and better nation than we have been in the past. So, forgiveness is the key to letting go and moving forward. Thank you.